Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your daily existence is defined by the grind, literally. Picture this. The sun barely peeks over the thatched rooftops of your village, and already you're on your knees beside a grinding stone, your arms moving in a rhythm that feels eternal. Bread doesn't appear by magic. It comes from hours of pulverizing grain, your muscles aching long before the first loaf even bakes. The air smells faintly of smoke and sweat, a fragrance so constant it clings to you like the world's least glamorous perfume. You don't get to choose rest. You don't get to clock out. Your life is the definition of always on, except instead of emails, it's chickens, children, and that pile of wheat staring you down like an unpaid bill. And trust me, if you were dropped here from your comfy modern couch, you wouldn't last a day. You'd collapse halfway through scrubbing the laundry, muttering about how Wi-Fi never gave you blisters. You simply wouldn't survive. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it right now? I always love seeing the little constellation of places and moments where we all connect. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The daily toil for women in the Middle Ages isn't romantic or picturesque. It's bone-grinding, back-breaking labor that never truly ends. You rise with the sun and collapse with the stars, your body a machine for survival. You tend to fields, dragging heavy baskets of weeds and stones under a sky that seems far too big and far too indifferent. You stir pots over smoky fires until your eyes sting and water. Not because you're sentimental, but because the smoke doesn't care about your feelings. The children cry, the goats bleat, the bread burns if you look away for even a second. And the water you fetched from the well suddenly seems like too little for too many mouths. There's a rhythm to it all, though a cadence so relentless it weaves itself into your bones. Grind, knead, cook, clean, nurse, repeat. The stone under your hands feels smooth from generations of women before you, each of them leaving invisible grooves in the cycle. You hear their echoes in your own grunts of effort, as though the past itself is sighing through you. And in this monotony, there's a bitter truth. Your identity is tied to your usefulness, to your ability to endure. Now and then you laugh, because humor is as necessary as bread. You joke about how your grinding stone is more loyal than your husband. You snort when your neighbor trips over her own bucket, spilling water in a way that makes you both laugh until your ribs ache. That's the thing about humor here. It isn't grand or clever. It's survival, the spark that keeps you from sinking completely into the mud of exhaustion. But the labor comes with risks nobody writes about in chivalric tales. Your hands are cracked, your fingernails blackened from soil and ash. You're young, but your back creaks like an old door, and your knees ache in ways you can't explain. Modern medicine would call it arthritis, but you call it life. If you cut yourself while chopping onions with a dull blade, there's no antiseptic, no bandage roll, just cloth scraps and prayers that infection doesn't take hold. Historians note that women often worked more hours than men, balancing both domestic duties and fieldwork. And here's a strange little fact. Archaeologists examining skeletons often find that women's bones show heavier signs of strain and arthritis than men's, the silent testimony of lifetimes spent carrying burdens. No one applauded. While the chronicles sang of knights and kings, your reality was etched into your spine and hands. And yet, despite it all, you keep moving, because stopping isn't an option. Your life is the endless ticking of tasks, each one necessary, none of them praised. The chickens don't clap when you feed them, the fields don't bow when you weed them, and nobody writes poetry about a perfectly baked loaf of bread. Your existence is vital yet invisible, a paradox that defines your world. So tonight, as you picture yourself there, hands pressed against that grinding stone, shoulders stiff under the weight of the day, feel the hum of that unending rhythm. And remember, survival in this world is its own kind of quiet triumph, even if no bard ever sings about it. The seasons roll on, and with them comes a cruel reminder: childbirth. In your world, it's not a private, carefully managed event with white sheets and antiseptics. It's raw, communal, and terrifying. When the time comes, the walls of your small timbered hut seem to close in around you. The air is thick with smoke from the hearth, sweat dripping from your forehead as the midwife barks instructions you barely hear over the waves of pain. The cries of other women surround you, your mother, your sisters, your neighbors, each one urging you to push as though their voices alone could pull the child into the world. And yet, you know the risk. Every woman does. Childbirth in the Middle Ages is a gamble, where the odds are stacked cruelly against you. Fever, bleeding, the baby turned wrong, all of it could claim you in an instant. You whisper prayers to the Virgin Mary, clutching a wooden cross as though it were a lifeline. There's no doctor, no surgeon with neat gloves and sterile tools. Just the midwife's hands, her herbs, her whispered charms. Your life hangs in the balance, and everyone in the room knows it, though they don't dare speak it aloud. It's here, in this moment, that you realize just how disposable you are to the world around you. You're not the heroine of an epic tale. You're a vessel, a body meant to bring forth more bodies. Your worth is measured in children, and if you don't deliver both literally and figuratively, you risk disgrace or replacement. Some husbands remarry within weeks if their wives die in childbirth. To them, it isn't cruelty, it's necessity. The fields still need tending, meals must still be cooked, and heirs must still be born. Life rolls forward with a pitiless kind of momentum. And here's a bizarre but true detail. Medieval childbirth was often overseen not only by midwives, but also by priests, who would sometimes perform rituals at the threshold of the birthing room, as though demons themselves needed to be warded off before the baby's first cry. Holy water might be sprinkled, relics placed under the bed, and prayers muttered against the forces of evil believed to stalk the moment of birth. Imagine being in the worst pain of your life and watching someone wave a saint's bone near your head, as though that might stop you from bleeding out. The baby, if it survives, is wrapped tightly and baptized almost immediately, sometimes within hours, because infant mortality is so high that no one dares risk a soul lingering unbaptized. You, weak and trembling, are given no rest. If you survive, you'll be expected to return to work in days, your body still torn and bleeding, because bread doesn't bake itself and fields don't plow themselves. There are no maternity leaves here, only survival, and when you think of it, you laugh a little through the exhaustion, because if men were the ones giving birth, you're pretty sure medieval Europe would have invented pain relief centuries earlier. The chronicles would be filled with tales of Sir Reginald the Brave, who valiantly endured the pangs of labor and was rewarded with ale and applause afterward. Instead, you get a pat on the shoulder, maybe a whispered "well done" before someone hands you laundry to scrub. Historians still debate the actual role of midwives in this period. Were they wise healers, passing down generations of practical knowledge, or were they scapegoats, blamed when things went wrong and accused of witchcraft in later centuries? The truth is murky, layered in both reverence and suspicion. What is clear, though, is that women bore the brunt of the risk. Childbirth wasn't just a passage into motherhood. It was a battlefield with one of the highest death tolls of the age. And you, sitting there with a newborn pressed against your chest, know only this: you've survived today. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. The world outside still churns with demands, and you will be expected to meet them with a smile and a strong back, as though you didn't just walk to the very edge of death and return. The days after childbirth blur together in a haze of exhaustion. You barely sleep because the baby cries endlessly, and when the baby doesn't cry, you lie awake listening to make sure he still breathes. There's no cradle with soft blankets, no rattles to distract him, just swaddling cloth and your arms sore from endless rocking. You return to the grinding stone within a week, the weight of the stone matched only by the heaviness in your body. There's no sympathy, no sense that you've earned rest. Life doesn't wait for you to heal, and while you tend to your infant, the village reminds you of your other duty: obedience. Your husband expects his meals, his clothes, his fields maintained. If you falter, if you show weakness, it is seen as laziness or defiance. You quickly learn that your survival depends not only on childbirth, but also on silence, submission, and the ability to bear burdens without complaint. If you're lucky, your husband is merely indifferent. If you're unlucky, his hand is quick and there is no law to stop him. Here's a harsh reality. Under medieval law, a husband was often granted the right to discipline his wife, sometimes even with physical punishment. The limits of that right were vague, more custom than statute. Some communities whispered about a so-called rule of thumb, the idea that a stick no thicker than a man's thumb could be used without scandal. Whether that was an actual law or not, the sentiment was clear: your body was not your own. It belonged to your husband, your labor his to command, your silence his to expect. And yet, within this grim framework, women carved out small spaces of resistance. You hear the other wives gossiping at the well, their voices low but sharp, trading strategies to keep tempers cooled, to hide coins for emergencies, to feign illness when the weight of life grows too heavy. These whispers are lifelines, tiny rebellions stitched into the fabric of daily survival. Historians still debate how much agency women truly had in these moments. Were they powerless pawns, or cunning survivors who bent the rules in ways the chroniclers never bothered to record? You can't help but laugh, darkly maybe, as you picture the scribes and monks who wrote the official histories. They loved to describe kings and battles, treaties and taxes, but never the women at the well quietly plotting how to keep their children fed, or how to soothe each other's bruises, physical or otherwise. That's the real Middle Ages most people never read about, hidden between the lines of the illuminated manuscripts. A little-known fact. In some regions, women could and did take their grievances to local courts. But the process was daunting, often humiliating, and the odds of success were slim. To accuse your husband of cruelty was to risk your reputation, your children, even your life. Some tried, though. Their names rarely survived the centuries, but their courage echoes faintly in the brittle parchment of court rolls. You, though, know better than to dream of courts or justice. Instead, you find your own ways to endure. You focus on the warmth of your child pressed against your chest, the fleeting moments when he smiles, or the way the sun spills golden over the village at dawn. You cling to these small mercies because without them, the weight of your reality might crush you completely. And as you lay the baby down for a moment of sleep, you rub your aching back, mutter a prayer you're not sure anyone hears, and whisper to yourself the one truth every woman here knows. Survival isn't just about food or shelter. It's about swallowing your fear, hiding your pain, and moving forward anyway, because no one else will carry it for you. The seasons keep turning, as they always do, and with each one, your body bends a little lower to meet its demands. Summer brings the harvest, when every pair of hands is pressed into service, even your children's small fingers plucking grain heads from the fields. Autumn brings the gathering of wood, the endless stacking of fuel for the long winter ahead. Winter itself is a cage, the cold seeping into your bones no matter how close you huddle to the hearth. Canned spring, muddy, frantic spring arrives with planting, aching knees pressed into damp soil while you scatter seeds like prayers. Through all of it, your worth is measured in your ability to keep going. To falter is dangerous. If you can't finish your tasks, your family suffers and your husband's temper may flare. No one steps in to help, not because they are cruel, but because they are just as overburdened as you. You learn quickly that the weight of survival is individual, though you all sink under it together. Here's a historical truth that bites. Women in medieval Europe were legally tied to the concept of coverture. That meant that once married, your identity was essentially absorbed into your husband's. You couldn't own property independently. Your wages, if you somehow earned them, belonged to him. Your very legal existence was fused with his, as though you were a shadow. Single women and widows sometimes had more freedom, able to own shops or inherit land. But marriage, a so-called protection, often locked women in tighter than chains ever could. And yet, you adapt. You find small joys where you can, gossip whispered while spinning wool, laughter shared over a misstep at the market, songs hummed to infants while stirring the communal pot. These moments are like tiny cracks in a fortress wall, glimpses of sunlight in an otherwise grey existence. Sometimes late at night, you and the other women trade stories, half warnings, half dreams about queens or noblewomen who seem to live in gilded cages instead of wooden ones. You scoff, but also wonder, is their captivity really so different from yours? A lesser-known fact. In some medieval towns, women were actually the backbone of local trade. Brewing, midwifery, cloth-making, and market selling were often dominated by women, until men organized guilds and gradually forced them out. What began as work that women owned became professionalized and, surprise, suddenly male-dominated. Historians still debate how deliberate this exclusion was, but the pattern is hard to miss. You imagine, for a moment, an alternate life, one where your skill at brewing ale or weaving cloth might give you some independence. But the law, the church, and the culture are all stacked against it. You are reminded at every turn that your place is not at the market table, but at the hearth. Not in the ledger, but in the cradle. Your laugh comes bitterly. It seems society was terrified of what might happen if women had too much freedom. So you push forward, day after day, your back bent like the oxen you walk beside. And yet beneath the exhaustion, there's a simmering strength. You've learned to endure, to find loopholes, to carve out fragments of identity in stolen minutes of song, of prayer, of quiet defiance. It isn't liberation, but it is survival. And in your world, that's as close to victory as you'll get. The church bells toll, pulling you from sleep before the sky even thinks about turning pale. Religion isn't just a backdrop to your life, it is the very loom on which everything is woven. Every hour, every rule, every expectation carries the weight of divine authority. You cross yourself before eating, whisper prayers while laboring, and bow your head at the priest's words as though they were carved in stone. To resist isn't just disobedience, it is heresy, a crime of the soul. And yet, the church that promises salvation also reminds you relentlessly of your inferiority. From the pulpit, the priest thunders about Eve's sin, about how all women are daughters of weakness and temptation. You hear it so often that it burrows into your bones. If your husband strikes you, well, wasn't it said that man is master of woman, just as Christ is master of the church? If you long for rest or independence, you're warned that idleness is the devil's workshop. Here's a strange fact that feels like bitter irony. Medieval theologians debated whether women even had full souls. Some argued that women were spiritually defective, incapable of true wisdom. Others countered that, of course, women had souls, but they must remain in submission or risk damnation. Historians still debate how literally these sermons shaped daily life, but you can feel their weight in every decision you're allowed, or not allowed, to make. Despite this, you cling to the parts of religion that offer comfort. You light candles for saints, whispering petitions for your children's health. You trace the painted faces of holy women in illuminated manuscripts, wondering what it must feel like to be remembered in gold leaf and ink. Perhaps the Virgin Mary is the only figure who grants you a glimpse of dignity, proof that womanhood itself can be sacred, if only when tied to obedience and purity. There is, however, another side of faith: fear. Rumors of witches coil through villages like smoke. A woman who knows too much about herbs, who has too many miscarriages, or even who speaks too boldly, may be whispered about in the market. The line between healer and heretic is razor thin, and stepping wrong can ruin you. You keep your head bowed, your tongue measured, even as you trade herbal knowledge in whispers behind closed doors. At night, lying on straw, you mull over the contradictions. The church tells you that you are both holy vessel and dangerous temptress, beloved child of God and cursed daughter of Eve. Which is it? You are both exhausted and strangely amused by the hypocrisy. Pick a lane, you might mutter, if sarcasm were safe currency here, but it isn't, so you keep your doubts tucked away like contraband. Still, there are quiet rebellions. You hum hymns while working, bending them into your own rhythms. You gather with other women for feast days, using celebration as a socially acceptable excuse to bond and laugh. You press your lips to relics and, in that intimate moment, slip in prayers not for heaven but for small earthly mercies, a gentler husband, a safe childbirth, a moment of peace. Historians remind us that the medieval church wasn't monolithic. In some regions, women ran convents, managed estates, even produced theological writings. But for the peasant woman in her thatched cottage, these exceptions feel as unreachable as the moon. What you have is not power but persistence. You endure sermons that call you weak, even as you carry more than most men could bear. You live in the shadow of Eve's curse, but in your small acts of devotion and defiance, you carve a survival of your own. The clang of hammers and the creak of timber announce the next reality you cannot escape: work. Endless bone-grinding work. From the moment you rise to the moment your body collapses at night, you are in motion. You haul water from the well, bend over the fields, turn the grinding stone, stir the pot, mend torn clothes and tend to the children who cling to your skirts like ivy. Your labor is invisible in the eyes of lords and scribes, yet it is the marrow of survival. The medieval world is merciless in dividing labor by gender. Men till and plow, yes, but you carry a double burden: work in the home and in the field. If your husband is away, whether for war, pilgrimage, or simply avoiding responsibilities, you shoulder his tasks as well. The word multitasking hasn't been invented, but if it had, your face would be the definition. You don't just juggle. You juggle flaming torches while standing in a mud pit. Here's a less-known historical detail. In many medieval villages, women were expected to work alongside men in harvest crews. Records even show women fined for not turning up to communal labor days. So not only were you unpaid for housework, you could be punished for not showing up for farm work. Imagine skipping your shift at the field because your toddler is sick, only to have a bailiff at your door with a fine. Medieval HR was brutal, and while men's tools might be plows or hammers, yours are the grinding stone and the spindle. Historians examining skeletal remains of medieval women often find their knees worn, their spines compressed, and their shoulders scarred by repetitive strain. That's the legacy of turning stones, hauling loads, and cradling children while stirring pots. Your body is both tool and prisoner, yet there are moments of camaraderie. When you and the other women gather at the stream to wash laundry, you trade gossip and jokes, weaving laughter into the fabric of hardship. When hands are chapped and aching from cold water, someone always makes a sarcastic comment. Something about being as wrinkled as a drowned saint, and the laughter carries you through. The humor is small, sharp, and necessary, but there's also danger in being seen idle. If a man lounges in the tavern, he's resting after labor. If a woman is caught sitting too long, she risks being called lazy, or worse, accused of neglecting her duties. The eyes of neighbors are everywhere, ready to judge. It's a constant performance, a choreography of effort where you must always appear useful. Still, you learn to find pockets of relief. Spinning wool becomes almost meditative, your fingers finding rhythm even as your thoughts drift elsewhere. Kneading bread dough lets you channel frustration into the pliant mass. Even gossip, traded in whispers, becomes an outlet. Your medieval version of a group chat vent session. You laugh about husbands who snore like oxen, priests who preach too long, or pigs that escape pens more often than they should. Historians still debate whether medieval women truly saw themselves as oppressed by labor, or if they simply accepted it as the rhythm of life. But from where you stand, knee-deep in mud, hands raw from pulling weeds, it feels less like a rhythm and more like a grindstone carving itself into your bones. You don't have the luxury of philosophy, you have chores, and tomorrow the cycle begins again. The church bell tolls slow and heavy, pulling you into another kind of obligation, the spiritual one. If labor weighs on your body, religion clamps down on your soul. You file into the stone church with the rest of the village, the air thick with incense that makes your eyes sting and your stomach churn. The priest stands at the front, robed in colors you'll never own, holding a book you'll never be allowed to read. Latin words spill from his mouth, mysterious and impenetrable like a secret spell cast over the congregation. You bow, kneel, cross yourself, all the motions drilled into you since childhood. You don't understand half of it, but you know the stakes, heaven or hell. The church isn't just about saving your soul. It polices your body too. It dictates what you wear, how you behave, even how often you're allowed to touch your husband. And God forbid you enjoy it. Pleasure is a sin unless it produces a child. And even then you're supposed to feel guilty. The Virgin Mary is held up as your model, pure, obedient, silent. Meanwhile, Eve is waved around like a cautionary tale. Temptress, sinner, the reason humanity suffers. It's a spiritual double-bind, and you're always the one at fault. Here's a lesser-known fact. Medieval sermons often singled out women specifically for being gossips or idle chatterers. Priests railed against women's tongues as if talking were the gateway to damnation. Imagine living in a world where venting to your neighbor about the price of eggs could be framed as a spiritual failing. A medieval TED Talk on the dangers of gossip would have had a full audience of sighing women rolling their eyes. And the church's reach doesn't stop at gossip. It stretches into your home. If your husband beats you, the priest might tell you to endure it as Christ endured his suffering. If you question authority, you're branded rebellious or even heretical, and heresy for women could mean the stake. The shadow of fire lingers behind every whispered doubt, every attempt at independence. Yet there are cracks in the authority. You know the midwife who whispers protective charms alongside prayers, just in case the saints aren't listening. You've seen women sneak extra herbs into the bread to dull the edge of hunger, muttering blessings in the old tongue, half pagan, half Christian. Religion is less a clean doctrine and more a messy patchwork of fear, tradition, and hope stitched together in the fabric of daily life. Still, the church gives you one rare reprieve: festivals. On saints' days, the rules bend. You laugh, dance, eat more than usual. For a brief moment, joy is sanctioned, not condemned. You drink weak ale until your cheeks flush, and for once nobody scolds you for smiling too much. The priests may thunder about sin tomorrow, but tonight, the village sways together under the banner of a saint. Historians still argue whether medieval women found empowerment through religion, as nuns, mystics, or visionaries, or whether the church was only a cage. The truth probably lies in between. For you, religion is both anchor and shackle, both comfort and terror. You kneel on the cold stone floor, whispering prayers you half believe, and wonder if heaven has ears for women's voices, or if they get drowned out by the sound of men chanting in Latin. The harvest season creeps closer, and with it comes the endless drumbeat of duty. Your back is already aching at the thought of bending over for hours in the fields, gathering grain under the blazing sun. But before the harvest begins, there's a different kind of labor awaiting you: childbirth. You've been through it before, but each time carries the same razor's edge of fear. You've seen women vanish into childbirth, like ships swallowed by a storm. Their screams fading into silence and leaving only newborn cries, or worse, silence all around. There is no doctor here, no sterile tools or whispered reassurances. Instead, there is the midwife, experienced but as mortal as you, armed with herbs, prayers, and an unflinching face. She ties a charm around your wrist, a crude piece of wool meant to keep away the evil eye. A clay icon of St. Margaret is tucked beneath your pillow, for she is supposed to guard women in labor. You grip the hands of other women in the village, their knuckles as rough as yours, their voices murmuring encouragement. It's the only comfort you have: solidarity. Here's a strange historical truth. Some churchmen distrusted midwives, suspecting them of witchcraft, simply for knowing too much about the mysteries of women's bodies. There are accounts of midwives accused of using forbidden knowledge when their remedies worked too well. Imagine being condemned not for failure, but for success. It's a lose-lose scenario with your life as the stake. The pain builds like a tidal wave, impossible to resist. You bite down on a strip of leather, hoping not to break your teeth. There's no such thing as pain relief, unless you count the whispered prayer or the stale ale someone presses to your lips. The line between life and death is so thin here that every groan feels like a coin toss. You feel yourself slipping between worlds, suspended in that fragile space where women hover every time they give birth. And then, finally, it's over. A child is laid on your chest, squalling and pink, alive. Relief floods you so strongly it almost drowns the joy. You survived, this time, but survival isn't guaranteed tomorrow or the next birth or the one after that. You've heard the stories of women buried with their newborns, both lost in the same night. Historians debate whether childbirth was the single most dangerous event in a medieval woman's life, but they agree it was always shadowed by dread. No matter how many times you endured it, the risk never shrank. It was a constant reminder that your body was not entirely your own. It was a vessel for life, yes, but also a battlefield, and the enemy was within. As you cradle the infant, exhaustion heavier than stone pressing down on you, you glance at the midwife's eyes. They hold both relief and a quiet, tired sorrow. She's seen enough to know this victory is temporary. Tomorrow another woman will take your place, screaming against the dark. The child is here, swaddled in rough linen, and yet your duties do not pause. There's no convalescence for you, no gentle weeks of rest in bed. Instead, you rise sooner than you should, body stitched together with pain, and return to the grindstone, the water jars, the ceaseless rhythm of survival. Your breasts ache as the baby demands more milk than your weakened body can easily produce. Hunger gnaws at you, but you feed the child first, knowing that a thin mother is better than a starving infant. What's rarely spoken of is the expectation of constant fertility. Your body is not given a chance to recover before the pressure begins anew. Every year without a pregnancy is noticed, whispered about. A barren year means questions about your worth, suspicions about your health, or even rumors of divine punishment. It doesn't matter that your back still hurts from the last labor, or that your belly still feels loose and heavy. To the world around you, your womb is the true measure of your success. There's an odd historical footnote here. Some church records mention women fined for not producing enough children, as if reproduction itself were a civic duty. Imagine living with that invisible ledger hanging over your head. Every missed month of swelling belly, noted as a moral and economic failing. And if you think modern gossip spreads quickly, picture a small medieval village where nothing stays secret. Privacy is a luxury you'll never know. At night, when the child finally sleeps, you sit by the fire, hands raw from work, staring into the flames. The baby whimpers, and you rock him gently, humming a tune your mother once sang to you. The song is soft, but inside you there's a storm of exhaustion, frustration, and a longing you barely dare to name. You wonder what it would be like to live a life where your worth wasn't counted in children or chores. But you don't let that thought linger too long. It feels dangerous, almost seditious. The men around you seem blind to the toll. They see the new baby as a mark of their virility, a proof of prosperity, while your own body carries the scars, visible and invisible. Some chroniclers wrote about noble ladies suffering in childbirth, their tragedies recorded with solemn detail. But no one wrote about you or your neighbors. Your struggles vanish into silence, unremarked and unremembered. Historians still debate how many women died from childbirth, but they all agree the toll was enormous. It was the hidden battlefield of the medieval world, fought not with swords but with blood and breath. You cradle your child tighter, breathing in the faint, milky scent. The love is real, fierce and protective, and yet it's always edged with fear. The knowledge that this little one might not survive the winter fevers, the summer dysentery, or simply the cruel roll of fate. That's the paradox you live with every day. Love interlaced with dread, joy stitched into sorrow. And still you endure because that's what's demanded of you. The seasons keep shifting, and with them the relentless demands on your body. By the time your child is learning to walk, your belly may already swell again, carrying another fragile life you never quite had the strength to wish for. Your bones ache under the weight of constant pregnancies. Your skin carries the map of stretching and tearing, and your spirit feels pulled thin, like cloth worn threadbare from too much use. Yet, in the eyes of your husband, your neighbors, even the priest, this is exactly as it should be. To them, you are fulfilling your holy duty, your rightful purpose. There's a bitter irony here. The Church exalted the Virgin Mary as the ideal woman, praising her purity and obedience. But ordinary women were expected to be the opposite, always fertile, always birthing, always bleeding and nursing. You're supposed to be Mary and not Mary at the same time, saintly in spirit, endlessly productive in body. If that sounds like an impossible job description, that's because it was. And yet, failure to embody it made you a target of suspicion. You notice the way people glance at older women without children, or wives whose husbands seem discontent. Whispers of witchcraft cling easily to them, as if infertility or a stillbirth were evidence of a pact with dark powers. These accusations didn't spring from nowhere. They were a way of turning private grief into public shame. A woman's womb became not just her business, but everyone's business. A public field to be examined, measured, and judged. And here's something historians puzzle over. Despite high infant mortality rates, medieval communities still demanded large families, knowing full well many children wouldn't survive. It created a cruel cycle. More births meant more risk of maternal death, but fewer children meant economic hardship and social scorn. Your life, your health, was the gamble placed on the altar of survival. And no one asked whether you wanted to place that bet. Sometimes, when the village gathers for a baptism, you see the joy in the faces of others. But you can't help thinking of the babies who never made it that far. A hollow space lingers in your chest for each small grave, tucked into the churchyard, marked only by a wooden cross that will rot away in a season or two. The grief is private, but the pressure to try again is public. And so the cycle begins anew. At night, lying on the straw bed, you stare at the rafters above. Your husband snores beside you, his body heavy and untroubled by the burdens that weigh on yours. You feel the small flutter of new life within you, and alongside it the creeping dread of what's to come. Another birth, another gamble with pain, blood, and the possibility of death. You sigh, close your eyes, and whisper a prayer that the saints are listening. The prayer is short, practical, almost businesslike. Let me live, let the child live, let me survive to see tomorrow. The prayer you whisper in the dark isn't a selfish one. It's the same prayer whispered by countless women before you, etched into the bones of every mother who risked her life at the altar of childbirth. And when the day arrives, it is exactly as terrifying as you remembered, or worse. The midwife bustles in with her bundle of cloths, herbs, and charms, her lined face calm but unsmiling. She has seen this countless times, and she knows well how thin the line is between triumph and tragedy. The air in the room grows heavy with heat and fear. Candles flicker against the walls, the wax dripping like a slow countdown. You grip the edge of the wooden bed, knuckles white, body trembling, while the midwife murmurs prayers to Saint Margaret, patroness of safe deliveries. There's no soothing pain relief, no miracle drug, only your own endurance and the encouragement of women who have walked this path and somehow lived to tell of it. And then comes the fire, the tearing pain that racks your body like punishment from the heavens themselves. You cry out, a sound swallowed by the walls and ignored by the world outside. Your husband waits elsewhere as custom dictates. This is women's work, sacred and bloody. He will appear only once the outcome is clear, to smile if there's a son, to scowl if there's a daughter, to mourn if there's only silence. Here's something most people don't realize. Medieval midwives weren't just birthing attendants. They were healers, charm speakers, herbalists, and sometimes scapegoats. Their knowledge was passed down orally, shaped by centuries of trial and error. Some of their remedies, like using willow bark tea for pain, were genuinely effective, precursors to modern medicine. Others, like tying a piece of iron to the woman's thigh to ward off evil spirits, were less about biology and more about hope. Historians still debate how much was science and how much was superstition, but to you in this moment it doesn't matter. You cling to every word and every gesture, as though your life depends on it, because it does. Finally, after hours that feel like years, the air splits with the cry of a newborn. Relief crashes through you like a tidal wave. The baby is alive. You are alive. You hold the tiny bundle, wet and wailing, to your chest, tears mingling with sweat on your face. For a brief, shining moment, the world is pure joy. You forget the pain, the fear, the whispers about your worth. There is only the sound of your child's cries and the fragile beat of life. But then reality seeps back in. You remember the neighbors who buried infants last winter, the fever that swept through the village, the priest who said children's souls must be baptized quickly, lest they be lost to limbo. Even in this moment of joy, there is no true safety, no guarantee. You cradle your baby tighter, knowing that survival is never promised, only hoped for. The midwife wipes her hands on her apron, nods curtly, and mutters something about Saint Margaret's mercy. She looks older than she did when she arrived, as though every birth drains a little of her life force. You wonder if she'll be the one to deliver your next child, or if she'll be buried before then. Life moves in cycles like that, spinning endlessly, each turn another gamble. You close your eyes, rocking gently. You've survived this night, and for now that is enough. Tomorrow will bring its own battles, but tonight you rest in the fragile peace of survival. The days blur together after the birth, a haze of sleepless nights, aching limbs, and the constant cry of a newborn. You discover quickly that the ordeal didn't end when the baby emerged. It only changed its shape. Your body, raw and battered, still protests with every movement, yet the demands never pause. The child must be fed, swaddled, soothed. The household still expects its share of work. Grain does not grind itself. Water does not fetch itself. Fires do not feed themselves. You shuffle through the days half awake, your baby strapped to your chest, your hands still blistered from endless chores. Breastfeeding is not just nourishment, it's survival, and it's your responsibility alone. Wet nurses exist, yes, but they are rare luxuries for the wealthy. For you, failure is not an option. If your body cannot provide, your child may not live. It's a cruel equation. You remember women in the village whose breasts dried up after fevers, whose infants wasted away no matter how tightly they clung. Sometimes they tried goat's milk in desperation, but more often than not, the little bodies withered, too fragile for such substitutions. What most people forget is how public your private struggles become. The entire village keeps watch on you, whispering about whether you're producing enough milk, whether your child looks plump or pale. An infant's health is never seen as just chance. It's a reflection of your adequacy as a mother. If the child thrives, you've done well. If the child falters, the shame rests squarely on your shoulders, as though you've personally failed the gods and your family. Historians still debate the psychological toll of such scrutiny, but the skeletal remains of countless malnourished infants show that the pressure wasn't just emotional. It was life or death. And then there's the baptism. The priest comes swiftly, often within days, sometimes within hours. Infant mortality is so high that no one dares delay. The ritual is meant to protect the child's soul, to ensure their place in heaven should the worst occur. You watch as holy water is dripped over your baby's fragile head, the Latin words rolling through the air like an incantation. There's comfort in it, a sense of security, but also a chilling reminder. No one does this ritual so urgently unless they expect loss. Baptism is less a celebration and more an insurance policy. Against the ever-present shadow of death, nights are the hardest. The world is dark, quiet except for the baby's cries which cut through your exhaustion like knives. You rock and hum softly, lullabies passed down from mothers who sang in the same fear centuries before. Sometimes when the baby finally settles, you just sit there in the quiet, afraid to lay them down in case they stop breathing. You've heard stories, infants smothered in their sleep or simply slipping away with no explanation. People say it's witches, demons, or divine will. You know it's just the fragility of life, but that doesn't make it easier. And in your quieter moments, you realize something haunting. You're not raising this child alone. The whole village feels entitled to a piece of your baby, offering advice, criticizing your methods, judging your choices. Your body was never fully your own, and now your child isn't either. Both are claimed by family, neighbors, church, and state. You exist in a net of obligations so tight, it leaves little room to breathe. You try to remind yourself of the joy, of the tiny fingers curling around yours, of the soft, steady breathing when the child finally sleeps. You treasure those moments, knowing they are fragile, knowing they can vanish overnight. And even as your body aches, even as the grinding stone calls you back, you whisper prayers that this child survives, that your effort will not be in vain. You know too many women who have buried tiny bundles wrapped in cloth. You know how quickly hope can sour into grief. So you rise every morning, heavy-eyed but determined, balancing the weight of your own exhaustion against the fragile spark of your child's life. For now that spark still flickers. For now it is enough. Your child grows, and with each inch gained comes another layer of responsibility. You begin to notice how quickly the expectations shift. Once the infant survives those precarious early months, the world seems to assume the danger has passed. But you know better. Illness can still strike, hunger can still gnaw, and accidents are constant companions. Yet the tone around you changes. The baby is no longer just a fragile bundle. It's a future worker, a potential heir, a bargaining chip for alliances sealed years from now. Childhood is brief here, more a pause between helplessness and labor than a stage of play and discovery. You see it most clearly in the girls. By the time your daughter is barely 7, the tasks placed on her shoulders echo your own. She carries water jars half her height, her arms trembling under their weight. She learns to grind grain, to weave, to care for smaller siblings. Toys? They exist, yes, but usually fashioned from scraps, rag dolls or carved wooden animals. Playtime is stolen in snatches, quickly curtailed when there's work to be done. Boys may run in the fields longer, but even they are expected to handle livestock or apprenticeships before their voices deepen. No one escapes the grip of duty for long. Historians often highlight the apprenticeship system for boys, training them in crafts or trades, but for girls, the apprenticeship is unspoken and constant. From the time she can walk steadily, a girl is in training to become a housekeeper, a mother, a laborer. You watch your daughter mimic your motions at the grinding stone, her tiny hands clumsy on the handle. She looks up, smiling at you, proud to help, and your heart twists, half with love, half with sorrow. You know exactly what awaits her, because you are still living it yourself. And then there's the question of education. For most families, literacy is an unreachable luxury. Boys in wealthier households might learn to read scripture, but girls are often excluded outright. Some monasteries provide exceptions, nunneries where girls can learn to read Latin prayers, to copy manuscripts, but those places are rare and mostly reserved for noble families. For a peasant girl, the only texts she encounters are the carved patterns on a spindle or the tally marks scratched on a doorpost. Knowledge is passed by word of mouth from mother to daughter, in recipes, remedies, and whispered warnings. It is practical, fragile knowledge, but it is enough to keep life moving. You recall the murmurs in the village about girls who are too clever. A girl who asks too many questions or shows too much spirit is often met with disapproval. Curiosity in boys can lead to opportunity. Curiosity in girls? It's treated as defiance, a flaw to be corrected before marriage. The world does not want her mind. It wants her hands, her womb, her silence. Even play carries warnings. You overhear older women telling little girls not to run too freely, not to laugh too loudly, not to climb trees or speak boldly. It will make you less desirable, they caution, as though the whole trajectory of a girl's life can be derailed by a misstep in childhood. You find yourself repeating some of those same warnings, even as you resent them. It's not cruelty, it's survival. If your daughter is seen as improper, her chances of marriage dwindle, and her future becomes even more precarious. You don't want to cage her spirit, but you know the world will not forgive her freedom. Sometimes at night you wonder if you've done right by her. You think of the fleeting moments when she laughs, hair wild, cheeks flushed, running barefoot through the dust. You think of the light in her eyes when she hums the songs you taught her, or when she sneaks a sweet berry into her mouth before handing you the basket. You cling to those flashes of childhood because you know they won't last. You can almost feel time tightening its grip, pulling her toward the same grindstone, the same obligations, the same silent prayers for survival. And the most haunting thought, your daughter doesn't yet realize that the world is already making decisions about her body, her labor, and her future. Decisions you cannot prevent, only soften. Historians still debate how much agency medieval women truly had, but you know in your bones that whatever rights exist on parchment, daily life tells a harsher story. Childhood is brief, freedom is fleeting, and the path ahead is narrow. So you hold her hand a little longer when you can, let her play a little more freely when no one is watching. You know the grind will claim her soon enough. For now she is still your little girl. For now she still laughs like the world is wide and kind. Seasons shift, and with them the duties pressed upon your shoulders evolve. The rhythm of the year is so predictable that it feels almost scripted, yet each cycle carries its own dangers and demands. The sowing season comes, and your body bends low for hours, scattering seeds with aching precision. The harvest follows months later, a frenzy of cutting, binding, and carrying that leaves your palms blistered and your back screaming. Between those peaks of activity lies the constant grind of maintenance, repairing tools, tending animals, hauling water, and spinning wool into thread. For women, these tasks aren't supplementary. They are essential. You are the silent engine behind the household, working before the sun rises and long after it sets. Men's work may be more visible, ploughing fields, serving lords in war, or sitting in councils. But your labor is what keeps families alive day to day. Without your bread, there is no meal. Without your care, the young and old wither. And yet, this invisible contribution rarely earns acknowledgement beyond the assumption that you will simply endure. The seasons also bring festivals, brief respites from the monotony. During harvest feasts, there might be music, laughter, even dancing around a bonfire. For a fleeting moment, you can almost forget the burdens. But even in celebration, roles are rigid. Men drink deeply, sing bawdy songs, and boast of their strength. Women serve, keep the fires lit, and make sure no child wanders too close to the flames. Your joy is always tethered, hemmed in by responsibility. Still, you savor the glow of firelight on familiar faces, the sound of your child's laughter mingling with the crackle of burning wood. One little-known fact: women's work often shifted drastically, depending on the region and the severity of the season. In some villages, when floods or droughts threatened survival, women were sent into fields in greater numbers, handling plows or digging trenches alongside men. Records even suggest that during especially harsh winters, women might be called upon to mend thatched roofs or manage livestock alone, while men were away seeking work. Survival blurred the boundaries of men's work and women's work, but when stability returned, society was quick to reassert the old rules. You notice how the changing weather reshapes not only the land, but also the people. In winter, food runs short, bellies shrink, and tempers flare. In spring, hope swells with the green shoots pushing through the soil. By summer, exhaustion presses down like the relentless sun. And autumn, though rich with harvest, carries its own panic. Will this be enough to last through the cold months ahead? The cycle is merciless, yet it is also all you have ever known. There are moments, though, when the landscape itself seems to breathe with you. Standing in a field at dawn, dew clinging to your rough skirts, you feel part of something immense and eternal. The air smells of damp earth and wildflowers, the sky streaked pink and gold. For a moment, the hardships fade, and you can almost convince yourself that the world is generous. Then the memory of taxes, quotas, and obligations creeps back in, and the illusion dissolves. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants experienced these cycles as crushing inevitabilities, or as a natural rhythm that provided structure and meaning. You suspect it was both. On one hand, the relentlessness grinds you down. On the other, there is comfort in the predictability, in knowing that after the darkest winter, spring will return, even if you are too weary to enjoy it fully. The seasons write themselves on your body, sunburn on your neck from summer's glare, cracked skin on your hands from winter's cold, and muscles hardened from years of repetitive labor. Each scar, each ache, each wrinkle carved by wind and toil is a testament to survival. And survival here is the only form of triumph allowed. So as the year turns yet again, you pick up your tools, adjust your shawl, and press forward. There is no pause button, no relief. Just the endless turning of seasons, carrying you along like a leaf in the current of a river you cannot escape. The church bell tolls, a heavy sound that governs the rhythm of your days as much as the seasons do. Its chime pulls you to prayers, to confessions, to sermons that echo through stone halls colder than winter winds. The church is everywhere, looming above the village, dictating morals, whispering of heaven and threatening with hell. You sit on the hard wooden bench, your knees stiff, your head bowed, listening as the priest reminds you that obedience is a woman's highest virtue. You already know what's expected. Silence, modesty, chastity before marriage, fidelity after. Your body belongs first to your father, then to your husband, and always, ultimately, to God. Any deviation is painted as sin, with consequences stretching not just through this life, but into eternity. You sometimes wonder if your soul is truly so fragile that the smallest misstep could tip it into flames, but the fear is effective. It shapes your choices, keeps your tongue still, makes you bow your head when you long to lift it. There is comfort, though, in ritual. The rhythm of prayers, the flicker of candles, the sweet scent of incense. It wraps you in a calm that your daily grind rarely provides. You find yourself whispering petitions for health, for good harvests, for safety during childbirth. And when a child recovers from illness or the rains finally come, you allow yourself to believe your whispered words made a difference. Hope is a fragile rope, and you cling to it tightly. Here's a strange truth that few mention. While priests preached the virtues of female obedience, many churches depended on women's unpaid labor. You scrubbed the floors, washed altar linens, wove the cloth that draped the sacred table. Monasteries grew wealthy from the offerings of women who hoped to buy protection for their families. And though theology relegated you to secondary status, your hands shaped the sacred spaces where God was praised. The contradiction is so glaring you almost laugh, except laughter during Mass would be seen as disrespect. The sermons often circle back to Eve, blamed for the fall of mankind. You feel the weight of that ancient accusation pressing on your shoulders. To be born a woman is in some eyes to be born guilty. You're reminded that your desires are dangerous, your curiosity a trap, your voice a temptation. The irony, of course, is that while you're blamed for the world's downfall, you're also expected to bring life into it, over and over, until your body is worn thin. Historians still debate how deeply these teachings seeped into everyday life. Some argue that women accepted their place without question, while others point to letters, diaries, and even court records that reveal quiet acts of resistance. Women refusing to attend Mass, or speaking against priests in hushed tones. You suspect both are true. Outwardly, compliance was safer. Inwardly, doubts bloomed like weeds, stubborn and unkillable. Sometimes, sitting in the dim church, you imagine slipping away, walking out into the sunlight and never coming back. But the church is not just religion, it is community, law, identity. To leave would be unthinkable. So you stay like everyone else, your voice joining the others in hymn, your eyes fixed on the crucifix above the altar, your heart a mixture of reverence and resignation. And when the bell tolls again, dismissing you back into the fields and the grind, you step outside into the brightness of day. The air feels fresher, freer, yet still tethered by the echoes of the sermon. You carry them with you like invisible chains, a reminder that even under the open sky you are never entirely your own. The marketplace is alive with sound and color, a rare break from the monotony of fields and hearth. You weave through the crowd, your basket tucked close, past stalls of wool, salted fish, and bundles of herbs that promise cures for everything from aching joints to heartbreak. For a fleeting moment, the buzz of voices and the jingle of coins almost feels liberating. Almost, but you know better. The market is not a place of freedom. It is another theater where your behavior is scrutinized, where a misstep can tarnish your name. You keep your eyes low, careful not to linger on the faces of men who laugh too loud or bargain too sharply. Your presence here is tolerated, not celebrated. You're expected to purchase, to trade, to carry, but not to linger or speak with too much confidence. A woman who haggles too fiercely is seen as shrewish, her tongue sharp enough to cut reputations. Yet if you do not argue, your family pays too dearly. It is a dance, this constant balancing act, and you've learned to step lightly. But the whispers follow you nonetheless. If you stand too close to a stranger, if your veil slips and your hair is seen, if you speak to a man not of your family, it becomes gossip before sunset. The marketplace is a web and every woman is caught in it. A cough, a smile, even a dropped coin can be twisted into stories you never meant to tell. The weight of reputation presses heavier than the basket on your arm. Still, the market holds its fascinations. You watch the spice seller with his saffron and pepper, treasures brought from lands so far away they sound like dreams. You touch the smooth surface of a bolt of dyed cloth, indigo deep as twilight, knowing it is far beyond your reach. The stallholders are mostly men, their voices loud, their gestures broad. Yet tucked into corners, women sell eggs, small cheeses, bundles of herbs tied with rough string. It is their quiet way of supplementing the endless work at home, of sneaking in a measure of independence beneath the eyes of husbands and fathers. Here's a detail often lost in grand histories. Women did play a role in commerce, but always on its edges. A widow might run a stall in her husband's stead, or a peasant woman might sell surplus from her chickens. Yet her earnings were rarely hers to keep. Laws, customs, and expectations funneled her profits back to the household, the authority of a man never far behind. Historians still debate how much agency women truly had in these small acts of trade. Were they exercising independence, or merely extending the labor of the home into public view? And then there's the law, lurking even here among the bustle of trade. A woman accused of cheating, of lying about weights or prices, faced harsher penalties than a man. Your word alone is never enough. It must be backed by the testimony of men. Justice, like trade, is another currency where you hold little sway. You sometimes think the marketplace is less about goods and more about power, and you are always on its losing side. Yet despite it all, you find small pleasures. The laughter of a child chasing a goose between stalls, the bright flash of saffron yellow against dull wool, the brief conversation with another woman, shared under the hum of bargaining, where your voices drop and your smiles are genuine. These moments are fleeting, fragile, but they are yours. You carry them home alongside the bread and onions, small treasures that no gossip or law can take away. When you leave the market, the sun is lower and your basket is heavier. The path home feels longer than before, weighed down not just with food, but with the awareness of how narrow the lanes of your life truly are. And yet in the rhythm of your steps, you feel the echo of that brief moment of connection, that reminder that even within chains, you are still human, still capable of joy. The church bell tolls in the distance, a deep, resonant sound that carries across the village and into your bones. You know what it means, not just prayer, but duty. Religion is the frame of your existence, a cage gilded with promises of salvation, but lined with bars of obedience. You walk toward the church, its stone walls looming like a silent judge, and feel the familiar mixture of awe and resentment. Inside, the air is cool, smelling faintly of incense and damp stone. Light filters through narrow windows, catching on dust motes that dance like spirits in the gloom. You kneel on the rough wooden bench, your body stiff from labor, and listen as the priest speaks in Latin. The words roll over you, beautiful and incomprehensible. They are not meant for you. They are meant to remind you that the path to heaven is mediated through him, through the hierarchy of men who claim the right to interpret the divine. You bow your head, not because you understand, but because not bowing would mark you as dangerous. Women are told that piety is their highest virtue, yet your access to it is filtered and constrained. You may pray, but you cannot preach. You may confess, but you cannot absolve. Your voice is welcome in hymns, but not in doctrine. Your devotion is expected, but your understanding is optional. Faith is both your comfort and your leash. The sermons often circle back to the same themes: Eve's sin, women's weakness, the need for obedience. You feel the sting of those words, even as you try to let them slide past. They are repeated so often they become part of the air, woven into the fabric of daily life. You are reminded that you are a daughter of Eve, a vessel of temptation, a being who must be guided, controlled, corrected. If you suffer, it is framed as natural, even deserved. And yet there are whispers of another truth. You've heard tales of women mystics, those who claimed visions and wrote of their encounters with the divine. Some were revered, their words treated as holy. Others were silenced, condemned as heretics. The line between saint and witch is perilously thin, drawn not by God but by men deciding whose voices served their purposes. Historians still debate how much space these women carved for themselves, how much influence they truly wielded in a world so ready to punish them for speaking out. The rituals themselves are a strange blend of comfort and control. The holy water cool against your skin, the shared recitation of prayers, the smell of incense rising like a thread toward heaven, all of it soothes your weary heart. But then comes the reminder, subtle and sharp. Obedience to husband, obedience to father, obedience to priest. Religion promises eternal life, but demands daily submission. You leave the church with your spirit both lifted and weighted. The silence outside feels different after the echo of chants and bells, but the words cling to you like smoke. You look at the faces of other women as they file out, and you see the same duality reflected. Devotion braided with resignation, hope laced with fear. The church is both sanctuary and snare. It gives you solace, but it also defines the boundaries of your world. And still you cling to faith because what else is there? When the harvest fails, when sickness comes, when life feels unbearable, prayer is the only medicine you can afford. You whisper your hopes into the silence, not because you are certain they will be heard, but because not speaking them would feel like giving up. Your voice may be small, but it is yours. The village square feels different today. Instead of the usual bustle of market stalls and gossip, there's a hush, broken only by the muttered voices of men in cloaks and the crackle of torches. At the center, a woman kneels, her hair tangled, her face pale but defiant. Chains rattle softly against her wrists. You don't need anyone to tell you what's happening. You know the signs of an accusation. Witchcraft. The charges are always vague, always impossible to disprove. So a sick cow, a sudden fever, a neighbor's jealousy. Any of these can become evidence. Today they say this woman cursed the harvest. You know her. She is no witch, just a widow with sharp words and no husband to shield her. But sharp words and independence are dangerous currencies. They can buy you food for a day and condemnation for a lifetime. The priest steps forward, his voice loud and certain, declaring the dangers of female wickedness. He invokes scripture, reminds everyone of Eve, and paints a picture of chaos that could only be contained by rooting out the corrupt. You watch as the crowd nods, uneasy but eager to believe. Fear is easier to hold than doubt. Better to sacrifice one woman than question the system itself. The rituals of accusation are as theatrical as they are cruel. She is questioned, shouted at, forced to confess to things that never happened. If she protests, it proves her guilt. If she weeps, it proves her weakness. If she stays silent, it proves her pact with darkness. There is no way to win. The trial is not for her. It is for the community, a grim performance of control. And here's the strange, haunting truth. Historians still debate how widespread the persecutions really were, but even the fear of accusation was enough to police women's behavior. Most accusations never reached fire or gallows, but the threat lingered over every outspoken wife, every skilled healer, every woman who stood out. Silence was safety. Obedience was armor. Individuality was a gamble you were almost guaranteed to lose. You shift uncomfortably in the crowd, knowing your face must remain neutral. To speak in her defense would be to invite suspicion onto yourself. The other women avert their eyes, clutching their children, whispering prayers. This is how fear spreads, quietly, efficiently, without needing flames. The real fire is in the minds of those who now know what not to say, what not to do, who not to be. The sentence comes swiftly, as it always does. She is guilty. She is led away, her figure shrinking against the torch's glow, her fate sealed by whispers and convenience. The men return to their places of authority, the villagers to their chores, and life continues as though nothing extraordinary has happened. But you know better. Something has shifted. Something fragile inside you has cracked. You walk home with your head down, your thoughts a storm. You feel the weight of an invisible yoke, heavier now than before. The harshness of your daily life is one thing, but this arbitrary cruelty, This reminder that your very existence can be twisted into a weapon against you. This is a terror that seeps into your bones. You tuck it away deep where fear always lives. You know you will whisper softer tomorrow, laugh less loudly, and never ever let your eyes linger on power. You wake to the sound of bells, not the cheerful peal of festival chimes, but the low measured toll that signals penance. The village gathers once more, this time for a spectacle that feels more like theater than justice. At the center stands another woman, older, her back bent from years of toil. She is dressed in rough sackcloth, her head shaved, her eyes cast downward. Around her neck hangs a placard scrawled with her crime: adultery. The punishment is public shame. She will walk barefoot through the square, jeered at by neighbors who only yesterday shared bread with her. Children throw handfuls of mud, encouraged by their elders. The priest follows, chanting about purity and sin, while her husband strides grimly at the back, his silence a heavier condemnation than any shouted insult. You watch her stumble, her feet cut by stones, her face streaked with humiliation more than dirt. This is not justice. It is ritualized cruelty. The law makes clear that a woman's body is not her own. Her honor belongs to her husband, her reputation to her family, her choices scrutinized by the entire village. The same act by a man might earn a shrug or a knowing smile, but for her it is ruin. She will carry this shame long after the sackcloth is gone. And here's a strange little-known twist. In some towns, women accused of adultery could be forced to parade with symbols of their supposed lust, carrying a wooden phallus or wearing horns on their head, visual humiliations meant to brand them forever. Historians still debate whether these practices were universal or localized curiosities, but the effect was always the same. Women's reputations were destroyed not by what they did, but by how others chose to see them. The villagers laugh, some nervously, others cruelly, as if mocking her could protect them from their own vulnerabilities. You feel a sour taste in your mouth, knowing you could just as easily be in her place. A smile at the wrong man, a whisper twisted by gossip, and you too could be paraded in sackcloth, reduced to a cautionary tale. When the bells finally stop, the woman is released, her head bowed, her dignity stripped, but her body still intact. She vanishes into her home, door slamming shut behind her, but the whispers will not stop. They will follow her to the market, to the well, to her grave. Her punishment is not over. It is simply beginning. You walk away with the others, the dust of the square rising around your ankles. You can feel the weight of eyes on your back, the unspoken reminder that you live under the same fragile rules. One misstep, one rumor, one unlucky moment, and you too could be dragged into the square. The harshness of your world isn't just in the hunger or the labor, it is in the constant surveillance, the invisible cage of reputation and fear. The square clears, but the unease lingers. You find yourself thinking of another cage, one not made of gossip but of walls and vows, the convent. For some women, it is a refuge, a place where the harshness of marriage or the risk of childbirth can be exchanged for quiet devotion. For others, it is nothing less than a prison, chosen not by them but for them, often at the whim of a father eager to save on dowries or a family desperate to prove piety. You remember the story of a girl not much older than 12, wrapped in white and led by her family to the gates of a convent. She cried, clutching at her mother's sleeve, but the nuns pulled her inside. That was the last the village saw of her. Her life now belongs to God, or rather to the strict hierarchy of abbacies and rules that dictate every moment of her day. The convent smells not of incense and holiness, but of damp stone and cold straw. Silence is demanded, obedience absolute. Meals are sparse, prayers endless. The sisters rise before dawn, their voices echoing in the chapel as they chant, their breath visible in the frigid winter air. Work fills the hours between, brewing beer, tending gardens, copying manuscripts if they are literate. It is a life of order, but not of freedom. And here's an unsettling truth. While some convents were centers of learning, even power, most were simply another way to contain women. Families could dispose of spare daughters by sending them to the cloister, and once the vows were taken, there was no going back. Some women rose to positions of influence as abbesses, managing land and wealth, but countless others lived and died in obscurity, their individuality erased beneath the sameness of veils and prayers. Historians still debate how much choice women had in these vows. Were some genuinely devoted, seeking peace in a turbulent world, or were most coerced, resigned to a future they did not want. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, tangled in the silence of those who never had the chance to tell their stories. You picture the cloister at night, lit by a single wavering candle. A young nun kneels in prayer, lips moving soundlessly, her shadow long against the stone wall. Does she feel holy serenity, or does she dream of the life stolen from her? The family she will never have, the freedom she will never taste? You shiver, knowing you might easily be her if your family's choices had tilted another way. The convent door closes in your mind like the clang of an iron gate. You walk faster, eager to leave the thought behind, but it lingers like a chill in your bones. The truth of your world is that women are traded between cages, from father's authority to husband's control, or to God's house where vows bind as tightly as shackles. Either way, the bars are invisible, but they are always there. The marketplace greets you again with its familiar clamor, yet beneath the noise lies a quieter reality that gnaws at you, the realm of medicine, or rather, the lack of it. When a man falls ill, he may seek the aid of a learned physician, someone trained at a university, cloaked in the authority of Latin texts and guild approval. But when a woman is in pain, especially in childbirth, her healer is another woman, usually a midwife armed with herbs, whispered knowledge, and centuries of practice passed down mouth to ear. You imagine a cramped cottage, the air pungent with sage, fennel, and rosemary. A woman labors on a straw-stuffed bed, sweat soaking through her linen shift, her moans filling the room. The midwife kneels at her side, murmuring encouragement, pressing charms into her hand. A sistrum-like rattle, thought to drive away evil spirits, shakes gently in the corner. There is no sterile steel, no trained doctor, only the wisdom of hands that have guided dozens of births before. Yet this wisdom, so vital, is always under suspicion. Here's a cruel irony. The very knowledge that makes midwives indispensable also makes them targets. When a child dies, or even when one lives but the mother falters, accusations surface. Whispers of witchcraft, of diabolical influence take root. The same herbs that soothe a fever are reimagined as potions of harm. The same hands that bring life are accused of consorting with death. Historians remind us that women provided the bulk of medical care for centuries, yet their role was deliberately erased as universities, controlled by men, declared themselves the sole gatekeepers of knowledge. By the later Middle Ages, women were systematically pushed out of professional medicine, their healing reduced to superstition in the eyes of the law. A simple midwife could be fined, imprisoned, or worse, burned, while a man performing the same practices was praised as a scholar. You picture the fear etched on a midwife's face as she's summoned before local magistrates after a difficult birth. Her basket of herbs sits at her feet, innocent in your eyes, damning in theirs. She protests, insisting she did what she always does, but the crowd mutters. "Witch!" someone hisses. And in that moment, centuries of practical wisdom mean nothing against the power of male-dominated law and the church's suspicion. And yet, despite the danger, the midwives remain. They show up in the dead of night, in the freezing cold, in cottages rank with poverty, because without them no woman stands a chance. Their resilience is legendary, their courage unrecorded in chronicles but etched in every life they deliver. You can almost hear the rasp of their breath, the steady rhythm of their prayers, as another child enters a world already poised against its mother. You step away from the image with a hollow feeling. It is not just that women's labor was undervalued. It is that their very survival work, keeping others alive, was twisted into grounds for their destruction. You wonder how many unmarked graves hold women who only ever sought to heal. The tolling of the church bell reminds you again of how tightly women's lives are bound to religion, not only in faith, but in law, morality, and punishment. The church is everywhere, in the rhythm of the week, in the prayers muttered before meals, in the very fabric of time marked by saints' feast days. Yet for women, it is not merely spiritual guidance. It is control wrapped in incense and sermons. You picture yourself seated on a rough wooden bench, the priest's voice booming from the pulpit. His words are not soft. They are stern, warning that women are the daughters of Eve, the weaker vessels, always teetering on the edge of sin. He cautions men to guard their wives, to discipline their daughters, to beware of women's wiles. Every glance feels like an accusation, as though your very existence is a temptation. The men nod gravely, as if reminded of a truth they already held. Here's a jarring reality. Church councils and theological texts often debated whether women were more prone to sin, weaker in intellect, and unfit for positions of authority. Some insisted women had souls equal to men. Others argued their souls were subordinate. Can you imagine sitting in the pew, hearing men debate whether your very soul was valid? It's like a panel of judges debating if your humanity should count on alternate Tuesdays. The church, in practice, imposed strict boundaries. You might pray fervently, attend every Mass and confess your sins, but you cannot preach, cannot hold office, cannot shape doctrine. Your piety must be expressed in silence and obedience. Even saints who were women, those rare exceptions, often had their visions filtered and approved by male confessors before being accepted. It's as if holiness itself required a male stamp of approval, and yet there's a strange duality here. The Virgin Mary was venerated as the pinnacle of purity and compassion, the very model of devotion. Women were told to emulate her, but the standard was impossible. To be Mary, you must be both mother and virgin, both strong and submissive, both utterly pure and utterly humble. You can't win. Even Joan of Arc, who claimed to hear divine voices, was first celebrated and then condemned by the same institution. Historians still debate whether her trial was truly about her visions or simply about a woman daring to command men. You walk through the cloister in your mind's eye, the arches cool and dim. In the silence, you wonder how many women took vows not from calling, but from lack of choice, pushed into convents to preserve family wealth, or because no husband could be found. Their holy life was often just another cage, though with cleaner floors. But even here their work could be dismissed, their authority curtailed by bishops and abbots, who saw them as convenient labor, not equals. The control was spiritual, yes, but also tangible. Marriage, divorce, inheritance, all passed under the eye of church law. If a man beat his wife, the priest might scold him gently but remind her to be obedient. If she strayed, the punishment was far harsher, her body and reputation branded with shame. The hypocrisy hung heavy in the incense. You step back from the vision with the weight of centuries pressing down. The bells still ring, the sermons still echo, reminding you that women's morality in the Middle Ages was never entirely their own. It was policed, judged, and codified, a script written for them by men in robes. The clang of iron against stone pulls you away from the pulpit and into the marketplace, a place where women's bodies and reputations were policed as publicly as the goods on display. Here punishment isn't whispered in sermons. It's performed, spectacular and humiliating for all to see. You catch sight of a woman strapped to the pillory, her head and hands locked in the wooden frame. Her hair is disheveled, her eyes red from crying, while villagers pass by hurling insults, scraps of spoiled food, even handfuls of mud. Her crime? Perhaps gossip, perhaps scolding her husband too loudly, perhaps stepping outside the narrow lines of good womanly behavior. In a world without much entertainment, public shaming becomes the theater of morality. And here's the bitter truth. While men were punished for theft or assault, women were often punished for existing improperly, being too outspoken, dressing above one's station, or even just being widowed and independent could draw suspicion. The phrase scold's bridle wasn't a metaphor. It was an actual iron muzzle clamped over a woman's head, spikes pressing against her tongue, silencing her in the most brutal way imaginable. Picture it, your mouth locked shut while onlookers jeer. It's medieval gagging, both literal and symbolic. Historians still debate how widespread these devices were, but the symbolism is undeniable. The fear of the nagging wife or shrewish woman was so intense that entire apparatuses were invented, just to shut her up. And it wasn't just physical silence, it was social silence too. Once punished publicly, a woman bore the mark of shame long after the iron was removed. You glance at the crowd and notice the strange mix of emotions. Some villagers smirk with cruel delight. Others avert their eyes uneasy. For them, this spectacle serves as both entertainment and warning. Don't step out of line. Don't raise your voice. Don't forget your place. The woman in the pillory isn't just being punished. She's being made into a lesson. It's almost theatrical in its cruelty. If Netflix had existed back then, they wouldn't have needed to make drama shows. Just a day at the marketplace would suffice. Though instead of binge-watching, you'd be binge-judging. As the bell tolls, signaling the end of her punishment, The woman is released, slumping to the ground, but the damage is done. Her reputation is scarred, her dignity stripped. For a woman in the Middle Ages, sometimes the harshest wounds weren't those inflicted on the body, but those carved into her standing in the community. The marketplace fades, but the echoes of humiliation linger in your ears as you move toward a darker horizon. War. When armies marched, villages trembled. For men, battle meant swords and shields, but for women, war was its own battlefield, fought not with weapons, but with survival. You hear the thunder of hooves long before you see the dust cloud. Soldiers, sometimes foreign raiders, sometimes your own king's men collecting dues, arrive like a storm. The men of the village brace themselves, but you know deep down that women are the most vulnerable. To the victors, women were part of the spoils, treated as extensions of livestock, land, or treasure. You clutch your shawl tighter as stories come rushing back, neighbors dragged away, daughters hidden in haylofts, mothers forced to stand silent while their families were torn apart. This isn't battlefield glory. This is the collateral cruelty historians too often skim over. Chroniclers loved to detail the number of knights slain or castles captured, but they often buried the unspoken truth. Women bore the brunt of conquest in their bodies, in their homes, in the quiet devastation that followed the clash of steel. And here's something most people don't know. Even during supposedly holy wars like the Crusades, there are records of women enslaved, trafficked, or forced into marriages against their will. The church thundered about sin, yet armies bearing its blessing committed horrors that didn't fit neatly into sermons. Historians still debate whether commanders turned a blind eye or quietly sanctioned it. But for women, the outcome was the same. Safety was fragile, fleeting, and easily shattered. Picture it, your husband gone to fight, leaving you behind with children and an empty field to tend. Then strangers arrive demanding grain, demanding shelter, demanding obedience. You can't fight them. You can't flee with little ones clinging to your skirts. Your only weapon is silence, compliance, and prayer. The sound of soldiers laughing outside your door is enough to freeze your blood. The strange thing is, communities adapted to this constant dread. Some built hidden cellars. Others taught girls to vanish into forests at the first sight of banners on the horizon. It was a grim sort of emergency drill, like today's fire drills, but instead of flames, it was men with spears and the license of war. You realize that the castle walls in the distance weren't just built to keep enemies out. They were built to give women inside even a thin chance at safety. But for those in villages, far from stone fortresses, there were no walls high enough, no prayers strong enough to stop the tide when war rolled in. The thunder of war fades, but another battlefield always waits. One fought inside homes, in small, dimly lit chambers where cries echo against stone walls. Childbirth, the most ordinary miracle, was also one of the most dangerous gambles of your life. You imagine yourself lying on a straw-stuffed mattress, sweat slick on your brow, surrounded not by doctors in crisp coats, but by a circle of women from your village, midwives, experienced hands, yes, but their knowledge is stitched together from folklore, trial and error, whispered charms, and herbs gathered from the hedgerows. A sprig of rue for protection, a candle lit in honor of St. Margaret. The patron of childbirth may be a relic or amulet placed on your chest. It's both science and sorcery, though neither feels quite enough when the pain tears through you. Your screams are not private. Thin walls mean the whole village hears them. Sometimes people joke that men flee the house during birth because they cannot stand the sound. But for women, there is no escape. Every contraction is a reminder that the line between life and death is thinner than the blade of a sickle. Midwives press your belly, whisper encouragement, cross themselves again and again. Still, you know the odds. Here's a chilling fact. In some parts of medieval Europe, 1 in 3 women might die in childbirth across her lifetime. A single complication, breech birth, hemorrhage, infection, was a death sentence. And yet, even in the face of that danger, you were expected to keep trying again and again until your womb gave a son to carry on the family name, and the cruelty didn't end if you survived. Should you die, your body might be buried quickly, but your baby, if alive, would be baptized first. If the child was stillborn and unbaptized, priests sometimes refused to bury it in consecrated ground, forcing grieving mothers to accept their child laid to rest in unmarked earth. The sting of loss was compounded by the weight of sin the church claimed hovered over your family. There's also the overlooked role of midwives. They were both revered and feared. Revered, because they were often the only hope women had. Feared, because their work with blood and bodies made some people whisper about witchcraft. Some midwives were later accused of sorcery, punished for the very skills that had saved lives. Historians still debate whether these accusations were rare outliers or part of a broader pattern of mistrust toward women's knowledge. In your mind's eye, you clutch the hand of another woman, maybe your sister, maybe a friend, while another chants prayers and presses a hot cloth to your back. You know that if you survive, your body will bear the scars, tearing, weakness, chronic pain that lingers for years. But none of it will be spoken of. Your labor is your duty. Your survival, if it happens, is taken for granted. You catch your breath between waves of pain, realizing that no enemy soldier, no cruel law, no greedy landlord can make you feel as vulnerable as this moment. It is a war waged silently in every village, every year, for every woman. And it is a war where victory means not triumph, but simply waking up alive the next morning, a newborn pressed to your chest, and the knowledge that you will likely have to march back into this battlefield again and again until your body gives out. You survived childbirth, at least this time, but survival does not free you from suspicion. In fact, the very skills and strength that keep women alive can make them targets. Imagine after tending the sick, mixing herbs or delivering babies, finding yourself suddenly whispered about in the market. The word witch begins as a murmur, and once it takes root, it grows like ivy over stone. You picture a woman in your village, maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you know, stooped with age, hands stained from years of grinding herbs and pulling nettles. She has knowledge of which roots ease pain, which teas help sleep, which charms comfort a mother. She is valuable, but value can sour into fear. A sick cow, a spoiled harvest, or a child's fever, and suddenly all eyes turn to her. Superstition is a quick blade, and it is rarely wielded gently. Here's the harsh reality. In the Middle Ages, women were disproportionately accused of witchcraft, not because they wielded supernatural power, but because they wielded any power at all. Herbal knowledge, midwifery skills, or even being widowed and independent could mark you as dangerous. Male clerics wrote treatises about women being more susceptible to the devil's whispers, which says more about their anxieties than about reality. A strange, often overlooked fact is that accusations were not always grand, fiery spectacles. Many were small local disputes, neighbors quarreling, families blaming tragedy on someone who stood out. Witch was often a social weapon, used to cut down the vulnerable. Historians still debate whether these accusations were primarily about genuine belief in magic or convenient scapegoating. Likely it was both, fear wrapped in opportunism. You imagine the scene, a woman hauled before a small group of men, local officials, perhaps a priest, her voice breaking as she swears she has done nothing wrong. But innocence is slippery when superstition thickens the air. Maybe she is forced to recite prayers perfectly, without stumbling. Maybe she is dunked in water to test her purity. If she floats, she is guilty. If she sinks, she drowns. A rigged game dressed up as divine judgment. And even when no trial takes place, the whisper of accusation clings like smoke. A woman suspected of witchcraft might find herself avoided, her goods unsold at market, her presence unwelcome at festivals. Isolation becomes its own punishment. To be accused, even once, was to carry a shadow you could never quite shake. So you tread carefully, avoiding drawing too much attention to yourself. You keep your remedies quiet, your prayers simple, your words modest. But inside there is a cold, simmering awareness. Your body may survive childbirth, famine, even plague, but a single whispered word could undo you. You glance around your village and wonder which neighbor would look at you differently if their child fell ill, or their cow died, or their bread failed to rise. In that thought, you taste the truth, that survival is not just about enduring hunger or disease, but about navigating the knife edge of other people's fear. You try to steady your breath, to push aside the fear of whispers, but another reality presses in, one that feels even more relentless because it hides inside every transaction of daily life. Property, wealth, inheritance, all the scaffolding that gives shape to a person's future is rarely in your hands. You belong to someone else's ledger. Picture this. Your father dies and you expect perhaps a corner of his land or a share of his tools. But the laws are clear, sons inherit, daughters do not. At best, you may receive a dowry, pots, linens, maybe a small chest of coins. That's not yours to spend freely, but a gift, transferred straight into your husband's keeping. Your hands may spin the thread, bake the bread, harvest the grain, but your labor does not translate into ownership. It's as though the world has agreed you are a body to be managed, not a partner in the economy. Here's a strange, little-known wrinkle. In some parts of Europe, widows actually gained a sliver of power. With a husband gone, a woman could inherit and manage his property. For a moment, she might act as head of household, negotiating contracts or defending boundaries. But don't be fooled. Neighbors and relatives often circled like crows, eager to marry her off again, folding her back under a man's authority. Independence, however small, was usually treated as a problem to be solved. Historians still debate whether medieval women ever had true autonomy in economic matters. The written laws sometimes look generous, granting rights to widows or daughters. But in practice, local customs often stripped those rights away. A woman might own land on paper, yet every decision about it had to pass through a male guardian. Your worth was constantly filtered through someone else's permission. You think about your daily toil, the wool you spin until your fingertips crack, the cheese you cure, the grain you trade at market. Each item is valuable. Each could be sold for coin. But that coin disappears into your husband's purse or your father's account. You see the irony. You keep the household alive with invisible labor, yet you remain invisible on the page where names and wealth are recorded. Imagine the marketplace at harvest time. Men haggle over sacks of grain, cattle, and land rents. Behind them, women stand with baskets of eggs, bundles of herbs, or lengths of homespun cloth. The men's deals are remembered, entered in ledgers, blessed by contracts. The women's trade is casual, fleeting, unrecorded. Tomorrow, no one will remember the eggs you sold, except perhaps the children who ate them. It's a peculiar kind of theft, not of objects, but of recognition. The world borrows your labor and your body, then erases your name from the story. And so you learn to measure wealth not in coin or land, but in smaller currencies. A loaf of bread saved, a healthy child, a moment's rest under the eaves. Those are yours, however briefly, and no law can quite take them. Still, you wonder, when your bones join the earth, will anyone recall your work, your bargains, your quiet strength? Or will the record books close with nothing more than a man's name, as though you were never there at all? The bells toll, a sound that cuts through the village air like a command, and you know it's time to gather in the church. You walk there, feet dragging, not out of laziness, but out of resignation. This place is meant to be a sanctuary, yet for you it's more like another cage, one draped in incense and scripture. Inside, the cool stone presses down like the weight of centuries. The priest stands at the front, his voice booming as he speaks of sin, of obedience, of women's duty. He does not speak of your labor in the fields, or of the bread you bake that keeps households alive. No, the sermons seem designed to remind you that your soul is precarious, always teetering toward corruption unless tethered by male authority. Here's a strange, uncomfortable fact. The church did grant some women unusual roles. Nuns, abbesses, even mystics could wield influence, sometimes greater than men. Abbesses might oversee lands, run convent schools, or even advise kings. But don't get too inspired. These were exceptions, cloistered within walls. For most women, the path to holiness was defined by submission, obedience to father, to husband, to God. Historians still debate whether convent life was liberation or another form of control. Some argue that the convent was a refuge, a space where women could learn, create art, and avoid dangerous childbirth. Others say it was simply a gilded cage, a way to keep surplus daughters tucked safely away, their lives restricted to prayer and silence. The truth, like so much of history, is probably tangled somewhere in between. You kneel on the hard floor listening as the priest recites a passage about Eve and her original sin. You feel the weight of it pressing into your own skin, as though you've inherited a debt you never agreed to. Every woman here shifts uncomfortably, and yet none of you speak. This doctrine has been woven into the fabric of your world so tightly that to question it feels like pulling at the threads of the universe. Still, there are whispers, saints and mystics who claimed visions, who spoke in riddles that sometimes bent even the church's authority. Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, names carried in rumor and in reverent awe. They are proof that women's voices could slip through cracks in the stone walls. But for every Hildegard, There were countless anonymous women whose faith was measured not in visions, but in silent endurance. You glance at the stained glass windows. They blaze with saints, apostles, kings, but rarely with women. Mary, yes, the Virgin, spotless and obedient. Mary Magdalene, sometimes repentant, sometimes demonized. But ordinary women like you, absent, erased from holy light. And so you walk home after Mass, the sermon echoing in your ears, feeling both bound by faith and betrayed by it. Religion is not just belief, it is structure, law, rhythm. It shapes how neighbors see you, how men judge you, how you see yourself. You cannot escape it. But you also cannot quite silence the question that grows in your chest. If God made you, why must you always be told you are less? The morning sun finds you already at the loom, your fingers working the shuttle back and forth, but your thoughts keep drifting to the weight of eyes on your body. You don't own your form. It's policed by neighbors, priests, and the laws of men. In the Middle Ages, a woman's body wasn't just her own. It was a billboard for morality, honor, and family reputation. Your clothing tells the story. Too fine a dress, and whispers swirl that you're vain, overreaching, maybe even dabbling in sin. Too simple, and you're dismissed as lowly, unworthy, invisible. Sumptuary laws, yes, actual laws, dictated what you could wear based on your class, your husband's status, sometimes even the color of fabric. Imagine being fined because your sleeves were too long, or because you dared to wear scarlet reserved for nobility. It's like a medieval version of a dress code, except instead of detention, you could face public humiliation. Here's a little-known truth. Even widows' clothing was regulated. Black gowns marked mourning, but also constrained how quickly or boldly you might move on. The cloth became a cage, one thread at a time, and the scrutiny didn't end with fabric. Your body itself was constantly measured against shifting ideals. In some regions, plumpness signified prosperity and fertility. In others, slimness was equated with piety. No matter the standard, you could never quite win. The village gossip mill made sure of that. Even your hair was loaded with meaning. Loose hair could signal youth, but also danger, temptation, witchcraft, rebellion. So you covered it, wrapped it, tamed it, not always for modesty, but for survival. Historians still argue about whether these laws were strictly enforced or more symbolic, but the effect on women's daily lives was real. When you walked through the marketplace, you were not simply buying onions, you were on display, judged by skirt length, fabric choice, posture. Even silence and laughter carried weight. Too much laughter? Frivolous. Too quiet? Secretive. The punishments for stepping outside these invisible boundaries could be brutal. A woman accused of adultery might be paraded through the streets in nothing but her shift. A crown of thorns, or worse, dung, forced upon her head. Others were strapped into scolds' bridles, iron masks with sharp tongues of metal designed to punish women who spoke too freely. Public shaming wasn't just about punishment. It was theater, meant to remind every other woman watching. Stay small, stay obedient, stay silent. You imagine yourself at the center of such a scene, the crowd's eyes like stones thrown at your skin. And yet you also imagine the mutters of sympathy, the downcast looks from other women who know it could be them next. A shared terror wrapped in silence. As you finish the length of cloth on your loom, your mind lingers on the thought that your body is both your prison and your shield. You carry it carefully, aware that every step, every stitch, every glance can tip the balance between safety and disgrace. The cloth is finished, folded neatly, another day's work behind you. But the truth lingers in your bones. A woman in the Middle Ages was rarely allowed to simply exist as herself. Your worth was tallied in labor, fertility, obedience, and the fragile dance of reputation. To be too loud was dangerous, to be too quiet was suspicious. To be too visible was perilous, and to be invisible was to vanish from memory. You think of the countless others, women who spun wool by firelight, who bore children in silence, who sang lullabies that no chronicler thought worth recording. Their names are gone, their faces unremembered, but their lives were the mortar that held villages, castles, and kingdoms together. Without them, there is no story. Without them, even the grandest chronicles crumble into dust. Historians still argue whether medieval women were more oppressed than women in later centuries, whether opportunities in guilds or convents offered pockets of freedom. Yet behind every debate lies the same haunting reality. Most of their voices were never written down. Their laughter, their tears, their whispered prayers, all dissolved into the centuries, leaving only fragments for us to piece together. And yet when you close your eyes, you can feel them. You can feel the weight of their calloused hands on the grinding stone, the tremor in their shoulders as they endured public shame, the quiet pride when their children survived another winter. You can almost hear them humming, voices low as they worked side by side. Their resilience was not carved into monuments of stone, but into the survival of every generation that followed. The rhythm of the loom fades, and the edges of the world blur. Imagine the fields lying quiet under the moon, the faint glow of hearth fires softening into embers. The river flows steady, eternal, carrying with it the stories of those forgotten women. You are a thread in their tapestry, woven into something larger, older, unbreakable. Now let your breath slow. Let your body sink deeper, as though you too were settling into the dark earth after a long day. The harshness of the Middle Ages softens at this distance. Its sharp edges blur. What remains is the echo of endurance, of women who kept life moving forward against impossible odds. Feel that echo cradle you. Let it reassure you that even in struggle there is continuity. Even in silence there is legacy. The night is calm, and the world is safe enough to sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.